It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the fourth Dr. Alan W. Root Distinguished Lecture in Contemporary Art. We began this series in 2005, and it was a wonderful introduction for me as I joined the Hood in that year, and we've had a wonderful lecture ever since. And it's a particular pleasure to welcome Dr. Root and Janet, his wife, here this evening, and their three children for the first time, Michael, Jonathan, Jennifer, and their families. The Root family is a truly delightful and, I must say, very talented one. And what museum would not be thrilled to receive an endowed lecture? Dr. Root is a most distinguished pediatric endocrinologist, much published and honoured. And in 2003, his children had the wonderful idea of establishing this lecture in his honour. It was for his 70th birthday. And Dr. Root received his Dartmouth degree in 1955 and his major pre-med in 1956. He and Janet live in Tampa, Florida, and they've had a lifelong interest in contemporary art. Now, Alan, this is always where I get embarrassing for the Root family. I go through you all, introduce you each year, but there's always a different audience each year. So Alan and Janet's son Jonathan received his Dartmouth degree in 1982, his medical degree from the University of Florida in 1986, and his MBA from Columbia in 1995. You see the talent? And he and Betsy Blumenthal, who's very talented herself, they live in San Francisco, California, with Arthur and Max. And we've got a lot of the Root grandchildren here this evening as well. It's obviously a special day, and I'll tell you more in a minute. Jennifer received her Dartmouth degree, this is a Dartmouth family, in 1985, and her Dartmouth medical degree in 1989, and she lives in Sarasota, Florida, with Peter and their children, Gillian, Michael, and Mattie. And Michael is a triple graduate of Harvard, and he lives in Philadelphia with Carrie, who's here, and with Sarah and Zachary. So, wow. We're really thrilled to have the Root family so wonderfully and fully represented here this evening, and we truly appreciate their support for the Hood Museum of Art and for this lecture. And the reason for this wonderful occasion and gathering of the Root clan is because Janet and Alan celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, and Alan his, because you've done the math yourself, his 75th birthday. So can I offer you our appreciation? So for this august occasion, we've invited a very august lecturer indeed. Wu Hong is the Harry A. van der Stappen, a Distinguished Service Professor of Art History, East Asian Languages and Civilizations, Director of the Center for the Art of East Asia at the University of Chicago, and Consulting Curator at the Smart Museum of Art. Now, he specializes in early Chinese art, and from the earliest years right up until the Cultural Revolution, and in contemporary art. And his special research interests are actually very wide, but they include the relationships between visual forms, whether it's architecture or bronze vessels, pictorial carvings, murals, ritual, social memory, political discourse. His writings are hugely regarded in the field. He is very much a preeminent scholar in this country. And at the Smart Museum of Art, he has curated exhibitions, one at the moment on the Three Gorges, and previously Transient's Chinese experimental art at the end of the 20th century, which travelled here to the Hood Museum of Art. He also curated Inside Out, New Chinese Art, with a number of others, and wrote for the catalogue, and that exhibition travelled from the Asia Society in New York, where it began, to, among others, the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra, while I was there. His publications also include Monumentality in Early Chinese Art, 3,000 Years of Chinese Painting, Remaking Beijing, Tiananmen Square, and the Creation of a Political Space. He himself grew up in Beijing. He studied at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. From 1973 to 1978, he worked on the research staff of the Palace Museum, located inside Beijing's Forbidden City. And he came to Chicago in 1994. So 14 years ago. Now, for this lecture, Wu Hong has considered carefully the themes of art and the recognition that art is always contemporary. All art was contemporary once, but all art is contemporary to the extent that we view it because we live now. So it's the bringing of the past to the present and into the future. This is very much a theme of the Hood Museum of Art as we seek to explicate ourselves throughout the campus and the community as a museum that's not just concerned with being a museum, but with visual literacy. So we take the topic of visual literacy, we explore it, and Wu Hong will give a lecture titled Absence as Presence, Exploring a Fundamental Representation Mode in Chinese Art, in Art, and in Visual Culture. Can you welcome Wu Hong?
Thank you very much, Brian, for this very kind introduction. Also, thank you for inviting me to this lovely hall, auditorium, and this beautiful campus. It's my third time here at Dartmouth. I have a friend here. Every time I really enjoy the conversation with people here. The culture here is really one of the best places. And for today, this very important occasion, I feel I want to go beyond a particular historical period. Often we divide our history into ancient, medieval, Renaissance, modern, postmodern, whatever. But in art, actually, there's something very eternal. As Brian just said, in the museum, we see all this art at the same time. Now, they are all contemporary in a way. So we go there, we bring with our own experience, our life, and see this art. And we try to develop a kind of literacy, just how to see them, how to talk about them, how to understand them. That's very contemporary because we are all live now. So today, I try to transcend a particular period. I will derive my evidence from different periods in Chinese art history, a very long history. So there's a modern example, also some very old example. But the idea is to find a particular mode. This mode is actually, again, transcend any particular period. So even today, when contemporary artists are doing installation, conceptual art, I think they still are influenced by this mode. That's my topic. It's a new topic for me. It's the beginning of a larger research. Probably will lead to a book. So I feel very fortunate to present some ideas to you. I hope after my talk, if you have questions, comments, I would love to listen and answer. Let me begin. The title of this talk outlines my basic proposition quite literally. Basically, I hope to demonstrate to you that over the entire course of Chinese art, absence as presence has been an important visual model or visual technology that through marking and framing an empty space or image. And this model allows people to represent the subject without actually portraying it. I hope there's a technology just through marking or framing an empty space, or there's a concept idea about it. So you don't have to really represent that thing, but somehow you represent it. So that's called absence as presence. So that's a basic idea. I called this strategy technology because it has nothing to do with iconoclasm. Some people immediately say, oh, that's iconoclasm. We don't represent it. But actually, later you'll see, it has nothing to do with that kind of religious taboo. And also because this model underlines an entire system of visual presentation and representation. Numerous examples exist. An entire book could be written on the subject. In this talk, I will first use 3 examples from different periods to illustrate my basic claim. The second part of the lecture we'll develop a closer look at two kinds of objects. Very interesting objects, but people haven't really paid much attention to them. One is a mirror, another is a pillow. So it seems very interesting why I chose mirror and pillow as my subject, not great masterpieces, but I hope you will see my point. With their unique relationships with the person's body and face, both objects imply the user's self-imagination. So later I will show you the mirror is always about the person's face, or the big mirror about your body too. But the pillow is almost part of our body on a daily basis. So these two things are very interesting. Okay, let me start. First, I'll give you 3 examples from very different periods. My first example is a famous tomb, one of the most famous Chinese tombs called the Ma Wangdui Tomb #1 of the 2nd century BC. The names are not very important, so I didn't write here. Belonging to the wife of local governor in South China, 2nd century BC, okay? This tomb was found in an amazing condition. Even the woman's body was fully preserved from 2nd century BC. Was not a mummy. So the body is just a natural body. So now for doctors, for many people, this body we see to your right is fully preserved. You could understand the 2nd century BC human body, the diet, even what she ate that morning before she died. We have full knowledge just through this piece. So then you can imagine there are 1,000 things from the tomb are fully preserved. So it's an amazing tomb. Scholars have written volumes on the rich finds from the grave, which include more than 1,000 exquisite vessels, textiles, figurines, and especially a portrait of the deceased woman. That is an amazing painting, very big. To your right, that's a full painting about 2 meters long on the top of the coffin. So actually cover her body underneath the ceiling. So on the top of the ceiling. That is a central part of the painting that's from here. That's her image. So it's beautifully drawn, very hard to see, but there is a very nice face in silhouette. And she's placed in a cosmological framework. The sun, the moon, and the ground. Anyway, that's a wonderful painting. So scholars have been talking about many objects, especially this portrait. So today I won't talk about this. I can come back to talk about those, but today my focus is a different part of the tomb, which has really attracted my attention. And this part is this northern chamber, that's north. Here is a coffin chamber. So the painting is here above the coffin. So here the northern chamber is very important. That's here is a line drawing. So this northern part of the box-like tomb directly above the head of the deceased really present a big question for me. Unlike the other chambers in the tomb, which were filled with grave goods or the coffin, this chamber was rather empty and arranged as a stage. So here is basically several things from this chamber. Thick curtains were hung on the walls. We don't see here, but actually just along this chamber, there's thick curtains were hung on the walls. And a bamboo mat covered the floor. Elaborate vessels were placed in front of an empty couch, furnished with thick cushions and backed by a screen, a seat prepared for an invisible subject. Here you can see, okay. Here is elaborate these lacquer vessels. They are placed in front of a seat with cushions. And behind the cushion, there is a miniature screen, artificially made. And before this seat, there is shoes. You see the pairs of shoes? That's here. That's here. So we first have a seat, but there's nothing in the seat. It's an empty seat. Yeah. We realize the identity of the subject, which is invisible subject, from the objects placed around the seat. In front of the coach were 2 pairs of silk shoes, and next to it was a can and the toilet boxes containing cosmetics and a wig, a woman's wig, so all intimate personal belongings of the deceased woman. Drawing these objects to frame this invisible subject were several groups of figurines, including 8 singers and dancers performing in the company of several musicians. So we see these musicians are here. They are placed here, just directly in front of this seat. This performance was staged at the east end of the room opposite the couch at the west end. We can well imagine that the tomb occupant or her invisible soul spirit was watching the performance from the empty couch while enjoying food and drink. So that's a stage, totally arranged as such. So the only interesting thing is this deceased woman is not represented there. She is represented in the painting, but in this room, she is represented by this by her absence. Okay, my first example. My second example reverses this perceptual relationship between subject and object. Now it is an empty image that is being looked at. It is a masterpiece of Chinese painting called Reading the Stele. An imposing hanging scroll, 126 centimeters tall and 105 centimeters wide. It is traditionally attributed to the 10th century painter Li Cheng. But most scholars believe that it was created by one of Li's followers in the 12th or 13th century. By representing a traveler contemplating on a monumental stone stele in a desolate wintry landscape, the picture captures a typical occasion and the sentiment of a poetic genre called Huaigu, lamenting the past or meditating on the past. So here, let's see the painting. Basically, here is an enormous, monumental stone stele. It's a turtle-shaped base. So that's a typical this Chinese stele. Usually you have a text inscribed on the stele. In the painting, you see a figure, a traveler on donkey back, riding on the donkey back. Stopped here, looking at the stele, probably reading it, and the stele is surrounded by these withered trees, definitely a wintry landscape, very beautiful trees, very energetic, and bare landscape. So this painting is really illustrates this traditional poetic genre we call meditating on the past. So the stele symbolizes the past. The traveler symbolizes the present or present gaze. So the meeting of these two things, right? So I should explain that this Huaigu, we call it, or meditating on the past, representation in traditional Chinese art and literature, dwells on a standard perceptual mode, looking at an abandoned city or a ruined palace, one feels that one is confronting the past, both intimately linked with the past and hopelessly separated from it. That's basis of these kinds of poetic or pictorial modes. So it's separation from the past, also longing and memory of it. So the Huaigu sentiment, this kind of sentiment, is therefore necessarily defined by, in Stephen Owen's words, a gap of time, effacement, and memory. Okay. The problem is, however, that although every reader, scholars, researchers of this painting, including this observer, immediately takes the stele as an ancient stele. This is actually our own reading, our presumption, based on cultural imagination. In the painting, the stele is blank and provides no literary evidence for its date, nor does the image offer any clue of determining its age. Upon close examination of the work in the Osaka Museum in Japan, I found no trace of wearing or injury in the image. So the stele is delineated with smooth line, and all the decorative details, including the turtle-shaped base and the sculptured dragons on top, are rendered with impeccable precision. The stele is therefore new in our sense, because we don't see any damage. It is not a ruin. So how come we say it's the symbol of the past? That's our own perception, so it's very interesting. So in a way, the stele is empty in terms of both literary content and time, because we don't see the inscription. So it's empty in the literary content. Also empty in time, because we cannot say that's past or present or imaginary future, because it doesn't offer this kind of clue evidence. But the question is, why had I, along with my fellow interpreters, immediately taken it as an old stele? That's about myself. It's a contemporary issue, why a contemporary observer immediately conceived this image as an old stele that returned to myself. To answer this question, we may turn to another very important painting, old painting, one of Li Gonglin's illustration of filial piety in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, 11th century. It's a very important piece, very old piece. This scene in this 11th century scroll depicts a sacrifice to the deceased ancestors in a traditional family shrine. The living generations, descendants of the family, have arranged the offerings before a row of tablets of the ancestors and are waiting obediently for the arrival of the spirits of the tablets. So you can see these are the spiritual tablets. Each one represents a particular ancestor or ancestress. These are sacrificial vessels placed in front of these tablets, and these are living descendants. These are ceremonial gods, okay? Like Li Cheng's wordless stele, the tablets in this painting bears neither image nor inscriptions. So again, we see here, these are empty, the empty tablets. But in this case, in the case of the second painting, we do find the reason for their emptiness. From a passage in a very important book called the Book of Rites, a ritual canon used widely in ancient China as a guide to conducting ancestral worship. Instead of representing the likeness of an ancestor, the passage implies a tablet or stele functions as a place marker. Its sole significance being to locate the subject of worship. It was the worshiper who was supposed to work hard to evoke the mental image of the dead or the ancestor through a prolonged ritual process. So I read a section from the ritual canon because it's very beautifully written and very emotional. Really illustrates this visual mode. I read it. So the canon teaches, he should think, basically he means this guy, this person standing, the living descendant, okay? He should think how his ancestors lived and how they smiled and spoke, think of their views and intentions, and think of what they enjoyed. On the third day, he will see those for whom he is conducting the vigil. On the day of sacrifice, when he enters the shrine, he will indeed seem to see the ancestors at their places. After he has made his rounds and is about to go out, with a sense of awe, he will hear the ancestors' voices. When he's gone out into the front hall, softly he will hear the ancestors' sighs. So everything is a mental construct. It's not really represented there. Okay, that's ancestor. It's really through this ritual process, through memory, he reconstructs a mental image, not only image, including their taste, their ideas, their sight, their smell, all this enjoyment. It's very profound. So to a person who has fulfilled this ritual obligation, wordless stele, empty stele we see here is actually not empty because he's a person who gave the content. So in this case, again, empty as a presence, absence of presence, because the viewer had to construct it, construct the image. Actually, here is we talk about a lot of things, not just Chinese, Indian, or some many other examples, even contemporary conceptual art, rely on the viewer's reconstruction, rely on the conceptual level. You realize something in art. That's very similar, very similar. That's my second example. So the third example is very different. I jump to our time. I've selected my third example from recent Chinese art. It's a group of graffiti images that the experimental artist Zhang Dali made on Beijing's streets in the late 1990s, actually from mid-1990s to late 1990s. To make a long story short, Zhang Dali grew up in northeast China and went to study painting in one of the country's top art schools in early 90s in Beijing. He graduated in 1987 and then immigrated to Italy in 1989 after the student movement, which ended in bloodshed. You remember, 89, there was a student movement. So he was very much traumatized. He moved. He married with an Italian girl, both very nice friends of mine. So he went to Italy. On a self-exile. So in Bologna, he discovered the art of spray can graffiti in Italy. And began to create these images, graffiti images, just on the street of Bologna. And here is an image he created as a self-portrait there. There's a very interesting, because you can see the other responses to his images, including communist or neo-Nazi. A very interesting story. I don't have time to talk about it here. But the important thing is that he continued to paint the same head after moving back to China in 1995. He went back to China in Beijing in 1995. By 1998, he had sprayed more than 2,000 such images all over Beijing, often secretly. These images, which he created secretly at night, eventually became a focus of a public controversy. and were widely discussed in Beijing's newspapers and magazines. It was only then that Zhang Dali revealed his identity as the creator of these images. In one interview, he explained that this head is a condensation of my own likeness as an individual. It represents me to communicate with the city. I want to know everything about this city, its state of being, its transformation, its structure. I call this project dialogue. So that's one image he created very early on, just after he went back to China. Then here's the Beijing newspapers. You can see the image here. The title of this article is this art? Actually, it's a very important question for Chinese because that's the first time the Chinese public discuss this kind of art. Is this art? Then the reporter interviewed many people from the old lady to student to policeman to the different responses. And here you can see the newspaper has a lot of people were reading. interesting moment, the graffiti and that. But one thing I want to show here is in China, soon he turned this graffiti into quite a different image. He began to open up. That's an earlier style, basically based on this spray can thing. But in Beijing, he soon developed this like a cut hole on this half-destroyed traditional house. You know, in Beijing, the many traditional houses were destroyed to make rooms for these huge new buildings. So he always occupied this kind of space and put his own images on these walls. So he carved his image. And through the image, you can see the buildings. So he developed these kinds of images. He also sort of became a photographer because he created this hole and see through it to make photographs. This image is very beautiful because you can see there is a beautiful building behind. That is a Forbidden City in Beijing. So we see two kinds of traditional architecture. One is being preserved by the government. They're usually the palace, important temples. Another is a kind of vernacular architecture, which is being destroyed. So it's really about the contradiction, just the attitude towards the two different kinds of tradition. So that is a very interesting thing, I feel, this particular style. And again, there's a big hole, there is an absence, but then you can see through it, see different images. So a lot of cases, really, you can see contract the two different buildings. So by inscribing his empty head, this kind of empty heads on old houses, Zhang Dali was able to define a specific space around which to construct his identity as a local artist opposed to globalization and the commercialization. So because these new buildings really represent economic reform and globalization, but he put his images on this half-destroyed house. So it's very much about his own identity, own space. But as this ghostly image simultaneously implies, this opposition was never a heroic struggle and could only end in lament. Attached to a ruined house, this empty image was meant to be destroyed with the remnants of the house. So, meant to be destroyed with the past. He basically identified himself with the past, and these images will be destroyed. Maybe next month, maybe next year, but will disappear. So now to be extended into the future. So Zhang Dali told me in an interview I quote is very moving. He said, no, not yet. Walking along inside a destroyed house, I hear tiles breaking under my feet. The hollow sound seems to come from inside of me. I'm part of this vanishing scene. That's part of his statement. So there is no desire to cross the wasteland. Instead, he viewed himself from a future past tense as a memory in the making. So he continued, the same statement, the second part, he said, with the development of Beijing, my graffiti images will eventually disappear on their own. But they will leave a trace of memory, a dialogue between an artist and the city. So what he's talking about, or the point of these things, is really in the future. Some people will remember. Would remember, yeah, in the past, a crazy artist made some holes here and there. But those images would disappear. Actually, now already disappeared. So Beijing, now you go to see, you don't see these images anymore. You see a lot of these beautiful buildings, this monumental Olympic Stadium, CCTV towers. So the face of him already became a memory. And that's the empty heads all about. I feel that's my third example. From here, we'll move on to the second part of my talk, focusing on traditional Chinese mirrors and the ceramic pillows, bronze mirror and the ceramic pillows. If you don't know these objects, the people always ask the question, could people really use these pillows? Because it's so hard, but they did use it. Second is this kind of mirror. I will explain later. It had two sides. One side is reflexive. It's very small. Normally it's this size. You can see your face. And the other side is decorated. Okay. The most striking feature of these two objects, I feel, is their self-conscious display of the absence of the subject. Since this absence is often played up in their design, they often actively invite subjective intervention through viewing, physical contact, and the imagination. In particular, their deliberate hollowness stimulates dreams and fantasies, and provides occasions to develop narratives of miraculous encounters and transformations. One common type of story related to these images tells how the user of a mirror or pillow enters it and finds a different world in it. Another type relates the experiences of such objects as animated beings with will and feeling. So I will give you some examples. So it's interesting, I will describe, there is a deliberate hollowness, it's emptiness in these objects. Okay, and this hollowness inspires imagination, fantasy through actual design. So there's something to do with art. To demonstrate what is special about these objects, I want to start from a counterpart, exemplified by this ceramic bowl on the screen, very beautiful bowl. That I see as a counterpart, very different from the pillow and the mirror. So I showed the difference. Probably you can understand better what is special about this pillow or the mirror, this type of art. Found in an 11th century tomb, this bowl was found in a tomb. It is a good specimen of the Ding ware valued for its purity and simplicity. But its general aesthetic quality tells little about the bowl's relationship with its original owner or user. Such significance of the bowl is revealed by the manner of the burial. It was put next to the deceased with a few other personal items. We may ask why this vessel was singled out from the family's possession and buried in this particular tomb. A possible answer is that it bears its warm memory. It belonged to the deceased and was used by him or her and this past ownership led the family to give it up to the darkness. The art of burying, the act of burying this bowl next to the deceased betrays its meaning as an extension of the dead body. This reminds me of another passage in the book I just mentioned, the Book of Rites. It says, I quote, "A son shouldn't drink from his late mother's cup and bowls because they still bear the breath of her memory, her breath of her mouth, the breath of her mouth." So that's a very interesting quote, I think. The son and daughter shouldn't use it because the bowl itself still bears the mother's breath. Though invisible, the imaginary trace of the mother's breath turns an object into a sacred relic as well as a taboo item. The vision of a bowl bearing a mother's breath is beautiful and moving. We may borrow one author's words to call this vision a poetic image. It's a Bachelard. They call it a poetic image. He wrote, at the level of the poetic image, the duality of subject and object is iridescent, shimmering, uncertain, and unceasingly active in its inversions. It's a little bit abstract. So basically say, this kind of poetic image, we don't have a strict separation between subject and object. You just imagine here is the object, very beautiful. But once you think that actually there's, from the son's point of view, there's mother's breath. There's certain subjectivity is really represented by this. If you understand inside the tomb next to a body, so you have these kinds of not clearly separated, right? The subject object. So the imaginary and the short-lived subjectivity of a poetic image resists the historical contextualization, and it has no need of scholarship. That's, again, Bachelard's words. So we are historians, we trust the scholarship. But in this case, it's very hard to track down this subjectivity because it's too elusive. We cannot really pin down where's the breath, where's the mother, so we cannot tell people. So here, as our historian and scholar, we often reach a very difficult state about the artistic appreciation. So you want to turn it into a hard, fast fact, seems miss the point of why this object was placed in the tomb next to the body. But if you want to really reconstruct this memory, also it's pretty hard to reconstruct. But anyway, so looking at the ball, resurrected from a tomb, we can imagine the complex emotion, love, loss, longing, and fear that occasion its burial. But none of this emotion is registered in the bowl's elegant and self-contained form. What we arrived at is the incompleteness of a complete object. We sense that something is profoundly missing here, but we find no access to the seeming missing subject. So that's one case. One case I find, at least myself, reach a dead end. I know there's something missing. I know there's something very touching, but I find that I don't know how to get it back. But there are other occasions. So now we reach the pillow and mirror. But can such incompleteness, such a lack of subjectivity, stimulate the creation of visual images, just historically? People realize this kind of incompleteness and they use this idea to create images, to create objects. In other words, can an art object deliberately allude to the missing subject through its form and design? But here, the form doesn't allude this missing subject. But can this missing subject alluded, represented by a particular artwork and design? At this juncture, I return to the mirror and pillow, which show interesting parallels with the bow as well as crucial differences from it. So like the bow, a mirror or pillow could have an intimate relationship with their owner and user. In another passage in the Book of Rights, the author of this ritual canon instructs that, as a general principle, sons and their wives shouldn't touch the parents' belongings, personal belongings, not only cups and bowls, but also their quote-unquote clothes, coverlets, mats, stools, and pillows. Those, you shouldn't touch them. The underlying rationale is that because these objects were close physical contacts with the parents on a daily basis, they are conceived as part of the parents' bodies. To touch them would amount to blaspheming one's mother or father. So on that level, very similar to the bowl. You shouldn't touch the bowl belonging to your parents. A pillow was, and still is, one of the most intimate objects one can have. The portable size of a bronze mirror allowed a person to hold it while watching his or her own face. So here are two paintings, one from Song Dynasty. Here is a pillow, about pillow here. It's a Taoist maybe. Here is a wave, very hard to see, like a dream. Here is a pretty late. It's from Qing court. A lady, very elegant, is holding an antique pillow. Actually has a patina on it. And it's looking. So mirrors were among the most frequent used objects for furnishing graves, and were often buried next to the deceased head. That's a Han tomb. You have a mirror. Here is the platform for the dead body. So the head will be here. Yeah, will have been here. Sometimes the image of mirror could even play the role of a posthumous portrait. I talk about this example in a newly discovered 10th century tomb by showing their empty heads and the covered mirrors. So here is a covered mirrors. This picture representing the deceased husband, you have his head here. And this one representing the wife, you have a round mirror, you have a very elaborate head. So you don't have the person, you have the person's absence. You have this head of mirror representing the two genders. So in this case, the mirror and the other objects also imply almost like a use as a portrait. There is a major factor that distinguishes a mirror or pillow from the ceramic bowl. While the bowl shows no lack in itself, a mirror or pillow always registers the absence of the subject. Displayed in a museum, they appear awkward and incomplete. Every time I go to a museum, I feel, when I see the pillow, I feel always something missing. It seems not really complete, like a sculpture, like a painting. There's always something awkward about it. And a mirror is reduced to a bronze disc with an empty surface. A pillow resembles a self-sustained sculpture, but never is one, as its smoothly concave top always indicates a missing sleeper. It's always, you notice this smooth, concave subject is a missing subject sleeper there. In a mirror or pillow, therefore, the tension between subject and object is no longer fleeting and iridescent, but permanent and inevitable. Such tension predetermines the orientation of artistic creativity and stimulated endless variations of designs, which, without exception, substantiate the lack of subject with visual metaphors and narratives. So here my point is, the designer of this mirror and pillow recognize this lack of a subject. and translate this missing the leg into the design. I gave you a series of examples. So there appeared a kind of stimulus for artistic creation. That's important to me. Here is a Song Dynasty pillow in the Shanghai Art Museum. It's a smooth, slightly curved top. The headrest is supported by a miniature house. The windows of the house are shut, but the front door is half open. A flight of steps leads up to the door. There, an attendant seems to have just opened the door, welcoming someone to enter. The image of a half-open door was invented nearly 1,000 years ago, earlier during the Han Dynasty. So here is a Han Dynasty example, 2nd century AD, early 3rd century AD. You see a gate, a person just emerged from this half-open door. So often decorating sarcophagi or tomb chambers. When the ceramic pillow became a popular art medium around the Song to display images and calligraphy, it employs this old motif to signify not only the soul's entrance into the afterlife, but also dream experience, also implies the dream experience. So you enter a dream. A parallel phenomena is found in literature. In a Tang Dynasty story known in English as The Magic Pillows, the original Chinese title means literally a story inside the pillow, 枕中记. A Taoist immortal teaches a young scholar a lesson about the meaninglessness of a worldly glory by offering him a magic pillow. Here is the Taoist speech, he says. The pillow was made of a green porcelain. I found an example, like this one. Exactly as the one described in the story. Okay, the pillow was made of a green porcelain, the story goes, and had an opening at each end. So we see the opening here. The scholar bent his head toward it to take a nap. And as he did so, the opening grew larger and brighter, so that he was able to enter it. So that's a dream scene. What happened next was that the scholar found himself in his old home, where he married a beautiful woman, passed the state examination, and demonstrated his extraordinary talent, both as a civil official and as an army general. So he was very smooth, had a great official career. He then suffered great misfortune after being framed by jealous rivals. Although he eventually regained his position, he had reached the end of the life. Then he died. His death brought him back to the human world. It's a reversal. So because everything happened in the dream, so when he died, he actually returned to this life. As the story goes, I quote, he woke up with a start and found himself lying as before in the roadside inn, where the Tao is sitting by his side, and the millet that his host was cooking still not yet done. So it was a very short time. Everything happened. Everything was as it had been before he dozed off. The moral lesson of the tale that worldly glory is as transient, as illusory as a dream is a very old one in Chinese philosophy and religion. What is new here is the author's use of a pillow as a narrative device, which conveniently frames a dream world with a different temporal and spatial order. So here is really enter the pillow, became a really very useful narrative device. So this is a story in literature. We can see the imagination. Now let's return to the pillows from the Song Dynasty. We find many examples. Many of them allude to dream experiences. So on the most literal level, a plain white pillow bears only a couplet written in handsome calligraphy, which reads, I translate, to dream of love with a nymph, you need a marvelous pillow to rest on. So that's very little. 欲作高堂梦，须凭妙枕. Yeah, so I think some young man probably just ran out to buy this pillow. The pillow thus offers itself as a magical instrument capable of inducing, in this case, erotic dreams. Alternatively, a pillow exhibits a picture of a miraculous apparition. So what is illustrated on this example seems to be a supernatural event taking place on the other side of a gate. So the gate is here. There's a cave, actually. You see the gate, and there's decorations on the gate. So this scene happens on the other side of gate. Someone just came out from the gate, right? The gate is depicted at the right end of the pictorial composition. A bearded man, perhaps a Taoist, has just emerged from the gate and is encountering two immortals in clouds. Those are immortals in clouds, so he just came out and found this immortal. So that's really, you can see the pillow, it's just like a story, that you imagine a person uses a pillow, had a dream, in the dream he entered this scene, right? It's a different space. And here is another one. Some of these pillows were made for the burial. We know very clearly, made for the dead. Because the points on these pillows lament the brief life span of mortal beings. Here we can read, I won't translate fully, basically buried in the ground. So all the heroes and the heroines eventually will return to the ground. So this pillow was made for a deceased, still deceased. And still, other pillows bear pictorial scenes depicting partings and journeys, as we find in these two examples, where the man lying on such a pillow was dead, probably, or unconscious. He seems to have entered the picture on his pillow, either crossing a bridge to enter an unknown realm, or asking a cowherd where he could find immortals. That's a typical scene, a traveler asking a cowherd about the immortal land. So, and here is the bridge, and the people are crossing the bridge to another space. So all these things are really inspired by the function of the pillow and its relationship with dream. One can even read these pictures as scenes in a pictorial narrative, especially because the similar events characterize the literary descriptions of the search for immortality. In a rare Song funerary pillow, an elaborate miniature stage is constructed under the headrest. Although we are still unable to identify the content of the play, this example shows how a pillow becomes a virtual mode of expression to connect death, dream, and the theater. And here you have the theater. So because the theater and the death and the dream were connected in this kind of belief. So the pillow become a site or place for the artist to connect all these ideas, while still with the top empty, because there's a person lying there. It's the person who connect all these parts, dream, death, theater. The hollow body of a pillow inspires a fantasy to enter it, because the pillow has a three-dimensional volume. So usually in the literature, we read this man really enters this space. the most basic feature of a bronze mirror is not a three-dimensional body, but its double-sidedness. So here there is no body, but has the two faces. That become the basic feature of the mirror. In the novel, very famous novel, The Dream of the Red Chamber, a mirror called the magical mirror for the romantics, is said to have reflective surfaces on both sides. A Taoist gave this magic pillow to a man called Jia Rui, a young man whose lust for a beautiful aristocratic woman only won him derision. The Taoist told Jia, this young man, he said, this object comes from the hall of emptiness in the land of illusion. It was fashioned by the fairy disenchantment as an antidote to the ill effects of impure mental activity. It has life-giving and restorative properties, and has been brought into the world by the contemplation of those intelligent and handsome young gentlemen whose hearts are just too weak to the beauty. So this mirror described in the novel really had this magical function to cure this kind of mental weakness for the female beauty. The Taoist again instructed, I lend it to you on one important condition. You must only look into the back of the pin. Remember, you must look only into the back of the mirror. Never, never, under any circumstances, look into the front. The reflection Jia Rui found in the backside was a skeleton. So the young man followed the instruction and looked at the back. So here, I just want to say, here is the back, real case. Here is the front. So the Taoist actually asked him to look at the back, not the usual side. Yeah, he found a skeleton. I'll give you an example here. It's a Song painting, amazing painting, illustrating a skeleton here. The skeleton, he is a puppeteer. He's playing a puppet, little puppet. The puppet also appears a miniature skeleton. So Jia Rui found this skeleton image on the back of the mirror, cursing the Taoist. He was scared, of course. He hated this image, so he cursed the Taoist. He then turned the mirror around, and there was the woman he longed for, beckoning him to enter the mirror. So come in. Here is David Hawkes' translation of the rest of the episode. I read to you. Jia's excited soul floated into the mirror after her. There they performed the act of love together, after which she saw him out again. But when he found himself once more back in his bed, he stared and cried out in horror, for the mirror of his own accord had turned itself round in his hand, and the same skeleton that he had been seeing before stood facing him. He could feel the sweat trickling all over his body, and lower down in the bed, a little pool of semen that he has just ejaculated. Yet still he was not satisfied, and turned the face of the mirror once more towards him. The woman was there, beckoning him to him again, and calling him. And again he went in after her. He did this 3 or 4 times, but the last time, just as he was going to return from the mirror, 2 figures approached him, holding iron chains, which they fastened around him, and by which they proceeded to drag him away. Jia Rui cried out as they dragged him. He said, "Wait, let me stay, let me take the mirror with me." Those were the last words he ever uttered. It's very interesting this, he was still want to take the mirror with him because he is in the mirror. So that's a very ironical kind of term. I cited this rather long passage because it is very rare testimony to the different meanings of the two sides of mirror in literature. We don't find a lot talking about these two sides. Clearly here has entirely two meanings. The front side of the magical mirror for the Romantics only reflected the image Jia Rui wanted to see. The front side only reflected the woman, the image he wanted to see. What it mirrored was his desire, was inner desire. In contrast, the reflection on the back side revealed truth and delivered a warning, and could therefore potentially cure a misguided soul. So just imagine from Taoist point of view, if you just watch the skeleton, you realize the illusion, your mistake, probably Jia will be killed. So the backside reflects the truth and the potential magic power of this healing. Such a double-sided mirror is a fictional invention. We don't know any mirror have this double reflexive sides. So it's a fictional invention of Cao Xueqin, the author of this novel. In reality, a mirror's reflecting side is called front side. So in reality, this is the front side, clearly determined by the relationship between the reflected image and the hypothetical subject. The reverse side bears images and has a small nub in the center. Jia Rui's story in The Dream of the Red Chamber seems to suggest that the image in a mirror's reflective side is by nature illusionary. It's a woman, illusionary, and only reflects one's desire. Interestingly, this is also the meaning of this very famous image attributed to Gu Kaizhi of the 4th century AD. So it's oldest Chinese painting, also one of the most famous Chinese painting now in British Museum. So in the painting, there's one section we find this beautiful image. A woman is looking herself in a mirror. It's first this kind of image I can find. So here we have the first depiction of a woman watching herself in a mirror. An uninformed viewer, maybe you, uninformed viewer may take the painting as an innocent display of a feminine beauty. But the scene actually illustrates the text inscribed to the right. Illustrates the text. And the text, if you read it, it criticizes those who only know how to adorn their faces, not their characters. So this scene actually delivers a criticism. So you say it's bad, you just try to see yourself, adorn your faces, you should actually polish your inner character. That's the text. So that's very much like the story I just gave to you. This side is a reflected desire. It's a superficial thing, not really profound, not the truth. Traditional discourse on mirror often contract the two sides. And the Gu Kaizhi's painting we see here actually portrays two women. Actually, if we see the whole picture of scene, you have two women here. One is looking into the mirror, we see her face. One is actually, the face is implicit. We see the back of the mirror, the pattern of the mirror. So it's like itself like mirror images. Each one is very smart, very smart. So here the mirror is a front and back in this picture. But here is a very interesting case from traditional art. The mirror is presented as a three-dimensional object. But we modern art historians, unfortunately, only study the pattern on the back. Not because we consider the reflection in the front side untrustworthy, but because our professional interest has led us to only deal with concrete, stable images. Such images alone have been reproduced in catalogs and displayed in galleries. So here is a book about the history of mirror. You only see the back. So here is in one of the museums, you also displayed a back. That's our modern art history. We only deal with the backs. The mainstream scholarship on mirrors is thus to write a history of their backs by collecting different designs and by classifying into discrete types. A second scholarly tradition aims to identify the meaning of individual motifs through a standard iconographic investigation. There are two types of scholarship. One is a typological, one is iconographical. Iconography basically study the meaning of each image. Both kinds of scholarship serve legitimate purposes. I say still should be continued, but we should be conscious about what is omitted when adopting the purposes and the method of these two types of scholarship. The most obvious thing being omitted, of course, is the mirror's front side, which has simply vanished from reproduction, exhibitions, and scholarly discussions. Gone with the reflecting side is also the reflected historical face, as well as the relationship between this face and the design on the mirror's back. So I assume there was a relationship between the face inside this mirror and the design on the back. But right now, we only see the designs. We don't have the face. So we also don't pay attention to this connection. But I feel this connection is the most important to understand the meaning of the design. This design on the back of a mirror can be a sacred Taoist mountain, a Confucian paragon, a pair of lovebirds, or a scholar amidst mountain rivers. The mirror can be purely of bronze or can be elaborately inlaid and with precious materials of gold and silver and mother pearl, so different materiality. Each design and material is associated with a particular identity and a self-image. Some designs may allude to private fantasies, and some may even reflect individual aspirations. So for this mirror, I feel there must have been a Tang court lady holding these beautiful birds, beautiful flower in this richly decorated curvilinear shape, the flower petal-like shape. There's a connection between her face in the mirror and this ornate, elaborate, beautiful pattern on the back and the shape. And for a scholar, for Taoists, you see there's a mountain. There's sacred mountain, actually. That's the peak of the mountain. That's clouds. So if you watch your own face, your face already in the mountain. The mountain is at the back. You see the mountain actually is looked at from the top. There's a full mountain range. So your face on the back is really part of this sacred map. So that's scholars, and that's many. So there's a strong association. But once a mirror's undecorated side has been eliminated from the field of viewing in the gallery, from the field of scholarly research, the art historian can no longer imagine the face in the mirror. What is omitted is thus the mirror's implied subjectivity. I feel here is we study art, traditionally we treat art as just object. But I feel any art, good art, is created as a kind of expression, either collective or individual. So this person, this idea, this emotion, or even the convention is part of it. So I feel here the idea is by showing only the back, we lose the chance to think about this subjectivity. To end this talk, I want to propose that What makes a mirror or pillow an interesting art object is exactly such implied subjectivity. It is implied because a mirror or pillow in its own existence is a permanent reminder of the missing subject. It is always waiting to be reunited with the subject. But the reunion is always fleeting and never leaves physical traces. The decoration on a mirror or pillow doesn't fulfill such lack, but only translate such lack into symbolic images. I have therefore characterized these artifacts and many, many other images, both in Chinese and Western art, both in ancient and in contemporary art, as something between object and subject. A purely empirical study, scientific study, will never be able to pin down their meaning and allure. Thank you very much.